Funding for this program was provided by the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund, celebrating 25 years of giving; Preservation Virginia, honoring 125 years of helping communities preserve and utilize their historic places; the LeClaire Ryan Foundation, support for those who truly make a difference; and is the site of America's second-largest slave market about to be struck out to a pitch for redevelopment? Will the legendary location where Chief Powhatan ruled more than 30 tribes be spared? Can programs to revitalize a plantation once part of George Washington's Mount Vernon estate take root? History hangs in the balance with these questions and more. Mostly, history is words, a narrative written after the fact to be read in a book. Sometimes history is more than words on a page. Sometimes it stands there, touchable, substantial. Historic places are history in different form, the physical embodiment of our yesterdays, what's left of them. These places speak eloquently of the era in which they were built, of the tools, the materials, the technology of that time. They are real. Americans know this, are fascinated by it, value it, and respond to it. Increasingly, they support the search for and preservation of such places, not just mansions and monuments, but everyday buildings, streets, workplaces, commercial districts, neighborhoods, and that which is hidden in the ground. They cherish them for the lessons they teach, for their connection to the past, for their intrinsic charm and beauty, and as manifestations of the character that gave towns, cities, and even certain rural landscapes their unique qualities. Those psychic benefits are not the only ones derived from the preservation, the rehabilitation, or the reuse of the built environment. In places across the United States, particularly in Virginia, such activities are having a profound and positive effect on communities that have embraced and encouraged them. Taken together, they are the future of history.
There are Virginia Indians out there who definitely knew about the site, knew about its significance, and knew where its location was before the archaeologists actually discovered it.
It is where Comico, center of the Powhatan chiefdom. It existed 400 years before the establishment of Jamestown. Here, the legend of Pocahontas and Captain John Smith played out. Eventually, Comico disappeared into the mists of time. In 1997, on property along the York River, owned by Lynn and Bob Ripley, a chance discovery led to uncovering of this profoundly important place.
One day I saw something that looked like it was man-made, and I picked it up, and it was a piece of Indian pottery. So that was the beginning of it, where I started looking more as we walked, and every day I would seem to find something else and more, and arrowheads and pieces of pipe stems and colonial glass and dishes, pieces of them.
A window on a lost world had been opened. Soon, experts confirmed that Comico had been located.
It represents a site, the remains of which show the complexity, the reach, the sophistication of that culture under the leadership of Paramount Chief Powhatan. It represents to Virginia Indians a site that has almost sacred value.
This was a spiritual place. This was a political place. This was a powerful place. This was a place where powerful leaders resided. And that included not just the powerful leaders, but their spiritual guiders as well, the priests.
We made the public announcement that the College of William and Mary and the state of Virginia determined that it was Comico in 2003.
Their vision for the future was, number one, preserve it. Number two, make sure that there was the potential for public benefit, however that may work out in the future.
They understand the importance of the place as individuals, but they also understand the importance of the place to us is really special. So the fact that they are ensuring that this place will not be developed in the future is one of the most important things that could happen to the site.
Once you're here and you see that you've done things like found Chief Powhatan's house, found the big double D feature that's shown on the 1608 Pedro Zúñiga map connecting Jamestown and rural Comico together, this can't be developed, it needs to be preserved.
Kathleen Kilpatrick from Department of Historic Resources started talking to us about the different ways to preserve, you know, whether it's historic easement or preservation easement or open space and all of those. So we went through all of that.
We knew that once that easement was placed on it, that was it. It was perpetual.
That step was vital. So was a working partnership with the Virginia Indians that was at the core of Comico's re-emergence process.
We didn't want to go forward with anything unless the Virginia Indians were involved, because this was not our history, it wasn't our culture, it was theirs.
When it comes to doing that type of research that is associated with a specific stakeholder community or cultural community, it is of the utmost importance that they be involved in that research and the uncovering of that history and the interpretation of that history, and also in terms of controlling what is going to happen to that specific place.
The National Park Service at this time has been here many, many, many times, and they're very, very interested in the site relative to the Captain John Smith National Historic Water Trail. And the governor has been here just recently, and he's most interested in making sure there's tourism connected with rural Comico and the state of Virginia and jobs. And we're interested in both of those things.
Someday I'd like to see a museum where artifacts could be displayed for the public, maybe an ongoing archaeology excavation like they do at Jamestown, and people could come and watch. But, you know, it's there are a lot of things I'd like to see, but mainly just to see it come to life as an Indian village.
This was on the property of George Washington, and he gave it to his nephew, Lawrence Lewis, in 1799, and the house began in 1800.
That house was the pride of the Lewis family. It remained so until the 1840s, when it was sold to a group of Quakers.
When the Quakers were here, it was used as a place for agricultural experimentation and also social justice, in that they were using farmers who were not enslaved before the Civil War. Instead, they sold off portions of the property to freed blacks and others, and they, for the first time, actually turned a profit here at Woodlawn in terms of the agricultural use of the property, showing that it could be profitable without enslaved labor.
Time was unkind to Woodlawn. It fell into disrepair as owners came and went. But in the early 1950s, things improved when the National Trust for Historic Preservation made Woodlawn its first house museum. Restored to its former splendor, the property has been attracting visitors for over 60 years. But today, Woodlawn is no longer just a passive site. It is being converted in ways that connect it to its roots in agriculture and social justice, and importantly, help ensure its sustainability.
Arcadia, which we began a partnership with a few years ago, came to us and said, we would like to use the property here at Woodlawn for agriculture again, and we'd like to use it in a way that supplies food to low-income neighborhoods.
We run a program called the Mobile Market. We have 2 markets on the road this season that are making 18 stops per week in food deserts around the city. So these are neighborhoods where local residents just lack access to fresh food. They don't have a local grocery store they can go to. And we're bringing food, not just fresh food, but fresh food from local farmers that use sustainable practices.
There are 4 or 5 buildings, a bank barn, a corn crib, and some other historic agricultural buildings here on our property. And we're going to be working with the neighborhood restaurant group to repurpose those. And we'll be using them for experiential learning, but also for dining, and where the foods that are grown here at Woodlawn can be sold. People can come, they can learn about the agricultural past here, but they can also participate in a commercial enterprise. And we think it's a great win-win for a historic site. It helps keep these places sustainable by having private money join with nonprofit groups to make these places economically viable and sustainable for the future.
The new Woodlawn is also a classroom and a camp.
Since we got started out here, we've hosted many thousands of school kids for really rich field trips. They learn a lot about farming, they learn a lot about food and nutrition. We also host farm camp out here. We have 4 week-long sessions.
One of the things that we want to do at our historic sites is reach new generations. And yet kids who you see at our farm camps, they're not going to be wanting to go through a house museum and getting sort of the standard house museum tour. But they love being out there picking tomatoes and squashing bugs and learning about how the property was used. And they learn it in a hands-on way.
And so a new methodology for preserving sites like Woodlawn is emerging.
There are a number of places in Virginia and around the country where you see sites moving to become more economically sustainable, because if we can't keep these places up, if there's not the money to do the work on the buildings and sustain them, then we lose that memory and we lose that chance at continuity that preservation brings.
We had a out-of-sight tobacco barn. My grandfather really actually built it.
And they build the barns most of the time in the winter. You know, when they got through farming during the summer, in the wintertime they'd have a barn raised.
Tobacco barns are part of our history, and they're beautiful, but they are disappearing fast. So we need to preserve some.
Once a driver of Virginia's economy, tobacco is today a mere shadow of that. But dotting the state's rural landscape are the tobacco barns in which the golden leaf was stored. These humble buildings are reminders of a culture and way of life deeply rooted in Virginia's past.
They looked at it and they had never seen anything like it, because all the logs was the same length, and there was a diamond shape on each corners, and it was cut in a nice shape that they said was very strange, because it was so measured right to the T, and it was filled up with mud and rocks. It was one of the best barns in the community.
It represents a lot of hard work, and a lot of work took place in this. A lot of people spent time in here and shed blood, sweat, and tears in this place. America was a community of farmers up until the early 20th century. So the history in this place is just immense. It's a treasure. My family has taken care of this barn as best we could. But in the last few years, the foundation began to crumble. So when this program was announced, I jumped on it because I wanted to be able to save this old girl and keep her standing for a few more years.
The program, the Tobacco Barn Preservation Project, surveys barns in the county and then selects those that will be rehabilitated.
This project started in the late part of 2012. 2013 was the main structure of all the surveying, where 3 or 4 days a week we'd get 6 or 7 people in a vehicle, and we'd all go out to 6 barns a day and survey them. This is a portion of generations of heritage that is slowly decaying and falling apart. And through JTI and Preservation Virginia, this is the best way to protect, centuries and generations of a lifestyle is what we're really protecting. We're not just protecting an old foundation or old building, we're protecting a way of life.
And protecting buildings representative of that culture involves a craft itself teetering on the brink of extinction.
I was 13 years old when I first started redaubing barns when I farmed. And I've been, working on them all my life. And it's going to be a lost art. if somebody don't take this back up, restoring these barns.
Restoring chosen barns strengthens the connection between past, present, and future.
It's just, how are you going to replace this? Say if something ever happened to it, it burned up or it got knocked down, something like that, how would you ever replace the looks of this,
Thanks to the Tobacco Barn Preservation Project, that's not an issue, at least not in South Central Virginia. A lot of people are very happy about that.
There's been so many people who've stopped by here during this project, and they would share stories of being here in this barn, or if it wasn't this one, it was another one, and just joy on their face, and sometimes tears in their eyes, sharing the memories that they have.
What it's doing is it's sparking such a great interest in not just an old building or historic site being restored, but it's giving incentive to owners that have not received any of the grant monies to go out on their own, cut and clear around their barns, clean them up, and start doing some of their own work to preserve the barn.
Most black people in the United States can trace their ancestry back to Shockoe Bottom. So we have both a national touch as well as a localized reason for this area to be so significant.
Shockoe Bottom is an underutilized resource for the city because it's in a floodplain, but it's also very rich in history because of Richmond's position during the slave trade.
Shockoe Bottom was Richmond's center of commerce throughout the 19th century. Much of the commerce that took place there was slave trading, conducted in the longest-lasting slave market in the United States. It was one of the largest, second only to the one in New Orleans. Small wonder, then, that so many African Americans trace their ancestry to Shockoe Bottom. One such ancestor was Solomon Northrop, a free man kidnapped in Washington, D.C., then kept in jail in Shockoe Bottom on his journey to 12 years of slavery further south.
I am a descendant of Solomon Northrop. Solomon Northrop is my great-great-great-great-grandfather. For me personally, I had the opportunity to stand in that area, and it's really it's hard to explain how that feels to be able to say, I'm standing in a place where my ancestor was fearful for his life. I think maintaining that place as a sacred place helps to keep that experience available.
How to maintain that place is central to Richmond's preservation development debate.
The National Trust designated Shockoe Bottom as one of the most endangered historic places in America because of the nature and the extent of the redevelopment plans for this neighborhood. This place is a site of conscience. The current plan for Revitalize RVA would have an enormous baseball stadium in the middle of this historic area. In addition to the baseball stadium, large-scale hotel, 500 apartments, offices, retail, a minor league baseball entertainment district in the middle of one of the most important archaeological and historic sites in Virginia and in the United States.
We recognize in a city where we have 27% poverty that in order for us to address some of the infrastructure needs, educational needs that we have, we've got to expand our tax base. And so while we want to do the preservation piece, we've got to do simultaneously the economic development piece because there have to be resources to make these other things possible.
You know, historic preservationists do not oppose redevelopment here in Shockoe Bottom. Redevelopment here should not be a series of near misses where a foundation is dug and just misses an important archaeological site.
So we are now at this point with the ability and the knowledge to not only take charge of this site and reclaim it for the people who could not, but to now give their descendants the opportunity to say, what is the best way to approach how we take care of it, how we know its history, and how we preserve it for the future.
I think that our plan is very balanced, and our plan includes comprehensive archaeological digs simultaneous with the development of the project to make sure that if we come across something that we unearth it, that we make sure that we don't just overlook it.
Manage future change here in a way that preserves the archaeology, commemorates the history, and in and of itself creates economic revitalization through cultural heritage tourism.
Everybody comes to the table with their specific point of view and their specific need, and somehow we've got to pull that together.
And ultimately, that's the problem in Richmond's preservation development debate, getting people to compromise, to listen to each other. When it comes to the fate of Shockoe Bottom, that has not yet happened, and so the debate continues and the issue remains unresolved. Located in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains in southwest Virginia, Roanoke was once a railroad hub. Like many cities, though, it fell on hard times. But Roanoke didn't give up. Instead, it began reshaping its destiny by breathing life back into its main street, the city's downtown. Roanoke remade itself. The question is, how?
We really consciously thought, what is it that's special about Roanoke? What's authentic about it? How can we honor that through historic preservation, but still be flexible and build for the future?
The collection of buildings in downtown Roanoke is really what makes Roanoke unique. They are classic, they're really timeless, a collection of buildings that really make Roanoke, Roanoke.
For us, no higher form of recycling than recycling a building. So, you know, we have these great buildings that were built beautifully, and while they may look a little decrepit, people do have that vision where they can redo it. So they have great bones to work off.
It was really the tax credits becoming available that tipped the scale and made these projects feasible, financially feasible.
In Virginia, best tax credit system in the country. So when a developer can come in, get an old building, which you take a lot of risk with, you're not really sure what you're getting, but know that they'll get 40% back between the federal and state historic tax credits on their capital investment, really makes the numbers work.
Particularly in the case of Center Square, we have used historic credits on 3 buildings that were dilapidated, and we've used credits because we didn't have the ability to raise the amount of money locally necessary to renovate those buildings. And they were renovated to, of course, preserve the structure, but also to turn those structures into effective use that would add to education, economic development, and quality of life.
A lot of the buildings that have been in our downtown would not be feasibly renovated for new uses if not for the tax credit program. They really take a project that might be upside down financially and then make it very lucrative to do. And so it's really resulted in a lot of transformation of buildings that otherwise would just be sitting idle.
And there's been pivotal people behind that have taken on a lot of projects that have created that critical mass of making Roanoke a real success story.
It's never one person. It's never one company. It's never even one team of people in a development. The way this stuff works, it makes it super fascinating, is that you have to have spectacular local government. You've got to have great city management, great city council. On the policy and political front, you've got to have great building inspectors. But you've got to also be able to pull from the community to have the right accounting help, the right legal help. And that's just to make these things come together. And then you add into it architects and engineers, and then you add the people who actually build them. You know, you've got all these trades, you know, who are the people in the field that actually take the status quo that's not so great and make it amazing.
So we have had a growth in living downtown and a growth in bringing the public downtown, which has created a much safer, enjoyable place than we had years ago.
And so we've gone from 12 people living downtown 10 years ago to over 1,500 right now and growing. So you can feel the vibrancy in the air when you're out there.
So there's no better way to strengthen a community quickly than to take an old building that's being underused and try to figure out how to make it shine again.
The people are feeling proud about this community, and we're in the business of community building, and you do that through your social infrastructure and your capital infrastructure, and you do it by building off of your past and your strengths.
History is alive in Virginia. Alive in places, events, and people history has made justifiably famous. But because Virginia cherishes history in many forms, it is also alive in places of far less known renown. places which also help us see into another time. The preservation, rehabilitation, and reuse of those locations, the well-known and the anonymous, is a worthwhile endeavor that in ways tangible and intangible has bettered the state profoundly and substantially benefiting it and its people. It is the future of history. Funding for this program was provided by the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund, celebrating 25 years of giving; Preservation Virginia, honoring 125 years of helping communities preserve and utilize their historic places; the LeClaire Ryan Foundation, support for those who truly make a difference; and